Battlefield fans have been waiting for over a decade for this series to return to a proper modern theater of war, and Battlefield 6 has delivered that, and it's good. Thankfully, after multiple ambitious but flawed Battlefield games from DICE, Battlefield 6 needed to succeed, and it's so pleasing to be able to hop into a brand new, fully functional Battlefield game that is fun to play and has a solid framework for its future. Well done, DICE, you have righted the ship. However, and of course there is a however here, there's no denying that DICE, the studio behind Battlefield, just isn't what it used to be. If you're used to Battlefield games knocking your socks off with massive scale adventurous maps, insane graphics that are unquestionably the best on the market, wild Levolution events, airship behemoths that crash onto a town in fiery chaos, or V1 rockets that land on the battlefield like mini nukes to send you flying through the air, well, you're not going to get any of that here. Battlefield 6 feels almost like an overcorrection to Battlefield 2042's wild design choices, taking basically no risks whatsoever, and as a result, we get one of the safer feeling Battlefield games that I think I've ever played. But don't get me wrong, this doesn't make Battlefield 6 bad by any stretch. It's not. It's a great game that brings a lot of small but extremely important changes that have been sorely needed for a long time. But sadly, DICE's fear to push beyond the basic with this game may keep it from achieving the greatness that the studio has historically aimed for. DICE does have an ace up its sleeve though that could inject that wild fun factor that some players may be missing from the past games. Let's dive into some of my favorite things about Battlefield 6, and then we'll eventually get around to the things that suck. Now, booting up Battlefield 6, I've got to appreciate just how easy it is to jump right into some intense military combat. Within seconds, you can spawn into the front lines of an epic urban push towards an objective with explosions, bullets whizzing past you, and soldiers barking orders in a cacophony of combat all around you. It's awesome right away, and especially for anyone who hasn't played Battlefield before, this game may be one of the easiest introductions to the experience, despite its crazy menu interface, which we will get to later. Maps and modes are built around a tighter map flow and clearly marked objectives. There's very little downtime between spawning and getting into a firefight. It's as if DICE mathed out the maximum time players spend out of combat and tried to dial that way down to a scientific level just to make sure that they don't lose their ADHD player base. Part of this is aided with more cover on all the maps, allowing for longer, more consistent firefights. I'd wager that this is the most cover-y Battlefield game that's ever been made. The comparison between the old Firestorm map and the current one for BF6 is a great example of that difference. DICE just doesn't seem comfortable having any sort of big, open, vast spaces in this game, and this could be seen as good or bad depending on your preference as a player, but it does lead to much more consistent combat experiences across pretty much all the maps. Now, Battlefield 6's VFX are some of the more impressive new visuals here. Lingering smoke, tons of particle debris that comes from falling buildings. It really evolves the experience to feel far more authentic when in the midst of combat. The reason why these types of effects aren't usually pushed to this kind of extreme in other games is because particle effects, especially volumetrics and lingering effects, are very expensive to process in real time. But the BF6 devs have spent a lot of time getting these effects performant and dialing it up to 11. It's very fun using smoke and all of the kind of debris and visual cover as aid to mask your movement around the map. It adds this new sense of dynamic gameplay that just wasn't quite here on this level in past games. Now, of course, visuals don't matter much if the gameplay isn't fun, and I'm happy to report that the gunplay is very enjoyable, especially for a launch experience. Of course, there's plenty of room for balance here, but in terms of where it's at right now, I am very pleased. One of the things I really appreciate about getting brand new weapons is that they have decent setups to start with, good optics, and usually really fun to use right away. Some of the past Battlefield games would require you to get multiple unlocks before your weapon would become more effective on the battlefield and really feel like it was performing as designed, but Battlefield 6 has done a better job of making your guns fun right from the start, and then you can still improve them further with attachments as you go. Now that said, there's been some weapon bloom changes since the beta, and I'm finding certain weapon classes, assault rifles in particular, to be less enjoyable. It's certainly nothing that DICE can't fix, and it seems like they just kind of overcorrected for some feedback from the beta. Now, a pleasant surprise with weapons, and something that I'd recommend that everyone try out, are the new magnified optics that you can mount on any standard weapon and not just a DMR or sniper rifle. In the past, with like BF3 and BF4, weapon recoil usually meant that you would never even consider using something like a 4x ACOG on an assault rifle. So being able to finally take advantage of some really enjoyable magnified optics on more weapons in this game is super cool. Heck, I was using a magnified optic on an MP7 successfully, which is perhaps a little bit weird and maybe not super realistic, but it was really nice to have more options to configure your weapons, since a lot of people do prefer magnified optics on assault rifles in real life, and being able to make that work in game was very satisfying. The weapon customization menu is also great. The stats for the gun and the attachments is a massive upgrade over the previous titles, though it could still use some more work and more explanation. For example, precision versus control. I can guess as to what each of those stats mean, but it would be nice to have DICE clarify things a bit further. Also, some of the attachments don't change the weapon stats at all, but some cost more and have different descriptions, so it seems like there's some fixes and updates that need to be done to the stats here. Still, overall, a massive quality of life improvement. Now, I'm going to brag a little bit and let you guys know that I've played every single PC release of Battlefield since the very first game, even that cartoony third-person one. And I think having played all those games gives me a unique perspective as a reviewer, to be able to compare the current experience to every single game in the franchise. And now that you know that, hopefully it adds a little bit more weight to statements like when I say that I've never had an easier time matchmaking with friends than I have had in Battlefield 6. Sure, teaming up with friends should be an easy and painless experience, but it hasn't been in the past. For example, if you want to team up with a squad of 4 players in, say, Battlefield 3 or Battlefield 4, it could take upwards of 40 minutes just to get on the same team and in the same squad. Not only do Battlefield 6's party tools make it super easy to just join a party and get pulled into a match automatically, but your party leader can even queue you up for different game modes and servers while you're still playing in your current match, and it won't pull you out until it's found a game. This eliminates a huge amount of downtime in between matches when you're trying to move you and your friends around. It's an incredibly convenient experience, not without a few little bugs here and there. Now, Battlefield 6 is loaded with quality of life features that this game has sorely needed. They might sound mundane or slightly uninteresting individually, but all together they turn Battlefield 6 into a significantly better experience than we've had with just about any other game in the past. The new dragging players during a revive process is such a cool highlight here. It looks great, it's very useful, adds this new immersion to the combat experience, and it's got to be a staple going forward with future games. I don't think I can play another Battlefield game after this without dragging. Small things like being able to quickly hit the Q button to thank players for revives after they revive you makes it super easy to have small interactions quickly with players. Vehicle spawn timers are back and hopefully here to stay. Finally, no more aimless spamming of the deploy button while you're waiting for a vehicle. The assignment system is now in-game and trackable. You can also apply XP boosts while you're in a match. And for anyone who's suffered through DICE's previous assignment menus, you'll know the pain and horror of this process. It is now easier than ever to check your assignments, track your progress. You can track up to 4 different assignments at a time and just monitor it during a match. If you complete an assignment during a match, it'll tell you, and you can look for the next one and switch over to that one, rather than having to do all that work in between rounds, which often meant exiting a server in previous Battlefield games. You can now swap both your soldier and vehicle loadout when you spawn into a match. And this is actually huge, especially for vehicles. Historically, when you wanted to spawn into a vehicle from the deploy menu, you would spam into it as quickly as possible so that nobody else took it, but you wouldn't have time to change your loadout or configure the vehicle to be something that was more appropriate for the combat situation you were about to go into. Now you can spam to get the vehicle as quickly as possible and then change your loadout after you have it. This is such a big quality of life feature that seems so subtle or simple on the surface, but for veteran players, it makes all the difference. Now, the settings and options in this game are truly insane. The amount of customization from soldier input and the way they behave to vehicles to audio is just massive. And I appreciate all the work DICE did to make this accessible to the players, and it's really going to allow us to tweak our gameplay and settings to be exactly what we want it to be, instead of everybody being relegated to a one-size-fits-all type experience. You can modify your crosshair, the size of your mini-map, the way that your soldier interacts with leaning, the way that your bipod will deploy, all the kinds of toggle hold settings. You can turn off tinnitus, you can adjust the sensitivity of every single individual vehicle in the game. The list just goes on and on. You can also now queue up for a specific map and mode, which is a huge quality of life feature. Without a server browser for standard modes, this is very much needed for getting into a map that you want to play. That said, it does not always work as intended and will sometimes just put you in a different map. Hopefully DICE can iron out all the bugs with this system and maybe even allow for some re-queuing options. Say I could check a list of maps that I wanted to play and have it cycle through them for me. Currently, one of the problems with matchmaking in this game is that it can throw you into the same 4 maps over and over and over again, and you might not experience the one map that you really want to play. There's no dedicated server, so they're not going to cycle through a list of maps. You might just end up playing the same maps over and over. It's a bit of a problem, and I think DICE will be able to address this, but at the moment, you might want to take manual control over your matchmaking a bit more. Now, when it comes to vehicles, things feel decent for a launch Battlefield game, but that also means that they're far from perfect. I was really enjoying the attack helicopter, especially after unlocking some of its better weapons. The pilot-gunner gameplay combo is still there, and it's extremely fun. Now, performance-wise, Battlefield 6 has the best performance I've ever seen from a launch title. Sure, I've seen some complaints online from people with specific hardware setups that are having issues, but if that's not you, then you can probably expect a 100 plus FPS experience on PC. Currently, I'm playing at 4K Ultra settings, and without frame gen, I'm hitting well over 100 FPS. And I've heard similar experiences from people on lesser systems playing at 1440p. Now, when I turn on NVIDIA frame gen, the frame rate goes up to a stupid 300 to 400-ish range. It's absolutely bananas, and I can play 4K on a 240 hertz monitor and actually get enough frames. Now, Battlefield 6 isn't just a flat upgrade across the board. The game suffers from some legacy problems, and it even creates some new ones. One area that admittedly I felt a little bit let down in are the graphics. They're good, but they're not great. And it's kind of wild to say that about a Battlefield title, as the franchise has really made a name for itself, leading the industry with the best visuals pretty much every time it's released a game. This time around though, the visuals feel very inconsistent and much more map dependent than previous titles. Building interior lighting, especially on some of the New York maps, looks absolutely terrible. The auto exposure in some areas of this game is just the worst. And I mean like the worst I've seen in all of Battlefield's history, making dark areas sometimes impossible to see, and looking out of windows, sometimes the exterior becomes blindingly bright. And on top of that, many of the maps have this horrible color grading that just sucks all of the colors out of the game, turning it into this neutral, ugly palette, and then hits you with some gross contrast. There's actually a great video from Vic's Corner that discusses this specifically for Battlefield 6, and once you see his version of the game with his attempt to put neutral grading on it, it's hard to ignore just how much the look of this game is affected. And the fact that he's got well over 500,000 views just talking about the color in Battlefield 6 shows how many people are interested in this subject and are probably similarly not happy with it. And it particularly irks me with maps like Manhattan Bridge, which have some incredible gameplay spaces, but almost feel ruined by some of the ugliest color correction and extreme auto exposure that I've ever seen. Again, I'm judging Battlefield 6's graphics against past games like Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5 that were honestly master classes in visual style and jaw-dropping vistas. There's almost no jaw-dropping moments in BF6, and a lot of that's due to, I don't know, maybe a more novice art team this time around. And when Battlefield 6 combines some of its uglier visuals with bad map design, well, we get experiences like New Sobek City, a map that I'm already thinking about dropping out of every time it comes up in the rotation. Now, visuals aside, the maps that shipped with this game are a bit of a mixed bag. If I'm comparing them to the past games in the franchise, you could easily argue that they are on the weaker side, favoring tight, somewhat chaotic gameplay and lacking any sort of big visual spectacles. For players who wanted a larger, maybe less urban experience, there's fewer maps that will cater to you, and even the maps that traditionally offered that big, expansive experience, like Firestorm, have been cluttered up with so much infantry cover that they have a very different playstyle and vibe now. That said, some of the urban maps absolutely nail the infantry experience. Siege of Cairo, which was featured during the beta, is still an amazing experience. It feels like a truly authentic street fight with all of the alleyway fights you could ever want. Manhattan Bridge offers some of the most impressive rooftop and urban combat that I've ever experienced in a game. The destruction on this map is also epic, and the elevation changes and building-to-building firefights are just so badass. Again, if the color grading and auto exposure wasn't so bad on this map, it could be perfect. Mirok Valley, while visually on the simpler side, does scratch more of that Caspian border itch, and I absolutely appreciate all the outskirt areas to firefight in. Saints Quarter, which is an infantry-only small map, still plays very well, and it's one of the few maps that lets the game's color space breathe a little bit. And it's a great example of how good this game can look when it's not being so heavily stylized. Sadly, this map doesn't appear in normal rotations due to it being so small it's only available in the smaller TDM-style game modes. Something that's not really advertised about the game, and I think I played it for a good 6+ hours before I realized that that map wasn't coming up in the rotation. Now, Empire State and New Sobek City are two maps that I am not impressed with. Sobek City just feels poorly tested and caters to some extremely cheesy gameplay with snipers having vantage points all over the map and single entry point mined up defenses. It makes all the open area movement a constant nightmare as you're just getting sniped at all the time. Empire State, which was playable in the beta, is just chaotic with tons of angles and verticality and muddy visuals making spotting players very challenging. Now, it does look like DICE has improved some of the aggressive spotting since the beta, but I think player visibility will be an issue until they can dial down some of their crazy auto exposure and maybe even adjust the colors. Player spotting is definitely worse on some maps than others, and it feels like some of the maps got pushed out the door a little early where things just weren't tested visually enough. Now, balance-wise, Battlefield 6 has some questionable choices, specifically when it comes to classes, gadgets, and progression. Some of the assignments are just ridiculous and don't always track properly. To unlock the last sniper rifle, you need to get 150 sniper headshots at over 200 meters in the game. You know how many headshots I've gotten at over 200 meters in the game so far? None. The maps in this game are literally not designed to allow you to get headshots at this range You're going to have to fake it or join a bot server that is designed to get this assignment done. I think all the devs should have to unlock that weapon as punishment for writing such a crap assignment that was clearly not tested. Now, since the beta, some of the weapon handling actually feels a bit more off. Assault rifles seem to have a ton of bloom and recoil, but I can now laser beam people with SMGs at like 100 meters away. There's definitely some work to do here, but in general, I am liking the gunplay. It just needs a bit of tweaking. And for the most part, there are weapons in every single category that do feel viable. So that is a testament. There's certainly been Battlefield games that launched with weapon classes being completely inviable until they went through entire performance passes. Now, when it comes to class balance, well, it's just not good. Assault feels extremely underpowered. Its adrenaline injector class ability is just trash. I find myself rarely using it, and its passive abilities are also weak. The grenade launcher gadgets it gets feel pretty underpowered, and the dual primary weapon option rarely gets used because DICE splits the ammo. I actually think they should get rid of the split ammo thing to make that a more viable choice. The spawn beacon is the assault's most useful gadget, and even then the whole class just feels like a spawn beacon carrier and not much else. And just like the beta, support gets both health and ammo to distribute to yourself or teammates, and it can revive anybody on the battlefield, and it's just an incredibly good class. It's by far my most played. The defibrillators are straight up OP and need a cooldown or something. You could shoot and kill 5 players, and in the time it takes you to reload your weapon, a single medic could revive all 5 of them in no time. I'm actually surprised that the defibs didn't get nerfed since the beta, but I would be very surprised if a nerf wasn't coming down the road. Now, I will play engineer to deal with vehicles, especially at the start of a round or if a chopper pilot's being annoying or something like that. And I'll also play recon if I want to be annoying or just bot spam people with the drone, but otherwise those classes seem very situational. Now, when it comes to the topic of open weapons, that means allowing any class to use any gun in the game. Well, it's fine, I guess, in that the game is still playable and it's still fun. That said, I think you can make an airtight argument for why closed weapon systems is better, and I've said my piece on this before, so I'm not going to repeat all of that again. I'll just say that I think DICE made a mistake relegating closed weapons to a playlist. It's clearly going to kill off the popularity of that mode, and there's probably no going back. We're just stuck with open weapons, and that's that. Now, the user interface for Battlefield 6 is pure chaos. Finding the proper settings in areas to rebind controls is a maze. There's settings that you'll never even know existed because you're not going to be able to find the menus that they are hidden in. And as annoying as this is, it's not a game breaker because once you finally find everything and painstakingly configure all the stuff the way that you want, you'll probably never have to go back into the depths of these menus again, but it's still a really bad first-time experience. Even the streaming service-inspired front-end UI isn't great, but it's at least serviceable for getting into matches and playing with friends. Now, coming back around to vehicles a little bit, it does feel like they're still a bit of a work in progress. There seems to be some clear loadout winners for pretty much every vehicle setup, so once you get the best weapons and figure out what they are, you're probably not going to be switching your loadout too much with them. Also, the base anti-air tank is laughably bad at shooting down planes or helicopters. Maybe once you rank it up, you can get better at shooting them down, but honestly, I couldn't even take out a single aircraft with one of them. It is so bad. And speaking of flying and someone who loves flying helicopters in Battlefield games, not having a little bird in the game at launch is basically a crime in my book. How dare you, DICE? This better be coming down the road. And speaking of vehicles, there is a really bad bug in the game right now that appears to break vehicle spawns. For example, you may notice while you're playing that some maps, one team gets an attack helicopter and the other side does not. That's because the chopper will not spawn for the other side, and it will lead to crazy imbalanced rounds where the vehicles will not spawn for one team, and this has to get fixed ASAP because obviously it's a pretty darn bad bug. Now, despite this fairly extensive list of issues with Battlefield 6, none of them are game-breaking, for me anyway, and the quality of life features and updates have led to an incredibly fun launch experience. Aside from maybe Battlefield 1, I can't think of many Battlefield launches that were this fun right from the start. Assuming you didn't buy the game on EA app. But DICE really deserves some credit for finding their feet once again and delivering a solid game and injecting this game with so many of the quality of life features and little things that players have been wanting for years. No, it's not all of the features you have ever wanted, but it's a hell of a lot of them, and it makes a huge difference on the enjoyment and playability. Now, circling back around to that whole ace up Battlefield 6's sleeve, well, this game has an updated and refined portal system that is far more capable than the last one. Currently, we're so early in the game's public release that so far we're mostly just seeing the typical XP farming servers and pilot training servers, but I am hopeful that one day we will see a vast variety of gameplay experiences here that span the gamut from subtle balance changes and map rotations to complete reinventions of the game experience itself. The original Portal didn't do much to evolve 2042, sadly due to the more limited tool set and lack of interest in 2042, but with a proper foundation for Battlefield 6's base game and a much bigger interest from the community, it's very possible that the Portal experience will evolve into modes that are even more popular than the base game. Nonetheless, even in the current state, I am absolutely loving Battlefield 6. It's fun to play solo, it's even more fun to play with friends, and I'm enjoying tweaking my weapons and testing different class builds and strategies. We seem to have a robust content pipeline coming up for this game, and I can't wait to see the new maps and weapons and seasonal content and eventually a Firestorm mode as well. No, I'm not going to tell you that you should definitely go buy this game. That is for you to decide based on what you've seen here in this video. Most Battlefield games release their best content after the base launch, once they've figured out what players really want from the experience, and once Battlefield 6 gets closer to that stage, I think we're really going to be cooking with fire. I hope you guys enjoyed this Battlefield 6 review. Make sure you stick around for all the other Battlefield 6 content that I'll be covering for this game. Subscribe if you haven't already, and up next I'm going to shamelessly plug the video game that I'm working on called C-Beams. This is a spaceship action RPG, and working on it has given me an incredible insight and appreciation for the world of game development. I think you guys will enjoy the devlogs. Check it out here, and you can also wishlist it on Steam. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap signing off.